Hello, everybody. Welcome to my channel. My name is Margaret. I'm a historical fiction and fantasy author, and today I've got a research report out, which should be interesting to the nerds out there. So, welcome. That is the purpose today. My regular time, Wednesdays at noon Pacific, and there's a lot to cover. And I'm going to try to not make this sound quite like a lecture. I did consider making the slideshow a video background so that I could be in front of it like a green screen and use a pointer just for the added effect. But we decided that was too difficult because I didn't want to make the video under a minute, which is what StreamYard requires. And by the way, my pointer is a cat toy. So that's how professional we are around here and how seriously we take our academic credentials, which we don't have any. Anyway, hey everybody, nice to see you here. If you're new here, feel free to like the stream, subscribe. I'm going to be updating you on the research trip that I took to the UK, specifically London, Glasgow, and Saltcoats, and why I went those places, what I found there, what might make it into my next historical fiction story. So that's what we're dealing with today. It was basically a fishing expedition. So I'll leave that up there. I have a couple things that led up to this. So if you are coming in now and don't know and want to read about the topics that I've already covered, I can provide those. So before I went on this trip, read 3 different books that were about topics that I was researching and trying to narrow down. So that's the video on that I just put in the chat. And then if you're more interested in general planning to do research and how do you get the most out of your trip, I did a video on that. So I'll pop that in the chat as well. So now I've gone on the trip and I've come back, and what fish landed in my cooler? Hey, Nita! So I'm going to talk a little bit about the 2 main places that I visited. So the first one is the Glasgow City Archives, which are located in Mitchell Library in Glasgow. And I found these resources in the archives by Google research and then narrowed down to the pieces that I thought might be good representations of correspondence, real lives, historical experience that I could sort of model my motivations on for the story. And I'll get to the story so you have an idea in just a second. So Google research brought me to the Glasgow City Archives, and I did some emailing back and forth to be able to get an appointment and retrieve certain documents. And we'll see how that went in a second. Also, the North Ayrshire Heritage Centre, and this was a much smaller local museum in North Ayrshire is the new name for these sort of 3 towns that have banded together to form an administrative area. It's sort of complicated. But they had a museum that's now called a Heritage Center to sort of do more of the things that people are looking for it to do. And I had a very enjoyable time there. So what am I actually looking for before we get to what did I find? I chose these 2 places because I'm looking for where the Irish came across to the Glasgow area in the 1830s and 40s and what their effects were in terms of immigration and politics and social history. Evidence of reform movements, abolition movements, and Chartist movements in the Glasgow area, because those are some of those social history, political things that I want to map onto my characters and their realistic histories. And then also class, because UK stories don't do anything without class, the relations between the tobacco and sugar aristocracy. So first it was built on the backs of tobacco plantation owners, built on the backs of slaves at tobacco plantations. And then when they lost the American colonies it was the same for sugar plantations in the Caribbean and South America. So those folks were sort of vaulted into aristocracy. They were new money, but then they quickly became old money in Glasgow. And you'll see evidence of them everywhere. But how did they face off with the new laboring poor that were the result of industrialization in the area? And what's their conflict? What were the, hot button issues? So that's what I was looking for. And I went to Ardrossan, Saltcoats, and Stevenston, the three towns. The three tunes. I went there first, so we'll dive in there first. And just in case you're happening on this, I don't know about my already published work, I thought if you're this into history and you've made it this far, you probably might enjoy my books because they also dive into history and in the Scottish Highlands, and the family comes down to Glasgow, and there's emigration and social history, etc. So I've just popped up that into the chat, and that's the link to find my books wherever you want to buy them. So hopefully that's helpful. Hi, Cat Paw. Nice to see you. All right, so I remembered to do the author thing, and now I'm good. Okay, so things that might influence the story is a bigger category, and then that'll narrow down into things that make it into the book or books, because this is sort of envisioned as a trilogy with three main characters that are related, but obviously not decided yet. Shout out to Chelsea at CM Lockhart and Ash at Ash Writes Lost for the March Madness sprints. I've done 2 sessions so far and gotten 13 plus 7, about 20 chapters into revising this story based on the research trip. So it's moving in creeks and grinds and, but it's moving. So thank you for helping with that. Okay, so the first place I went was the Three Tunes, as I said. And what did I find? So I'll show you the booklets first. So I've got sort of my notes, and then I was going to show you the booklets, but I think I'll do this first. Oh, and this will be later. Okay. I've got all my paper souvenir paraphernalia. And receipts from the trip still. There we go. So the North Ayrshire Heritage Centre. It's a former church, so it's a good size for a small congregation. It's probably a 2,000 square foot house, if you can imagine that today. It's got upstairs, downstairs, and an open nave, as a church would have. And the open part is where the public can go, and there's a small library on one side, and there's exhibits sort of around the edges, a lot of multimedia. There's stuff to listen to, parts of it, and there's lots of open glass cases with placards explaining what they are. And so, as with any small museum, they've got lots of different time periods to draw from. So basically, I think they start in the 18th century, a lot of 19th century, a lot of early 20th century artifacts. And they've done a very good job of detailing why they choose to put it there. And I think they change things fairly regularly and seem to be a great resource. So I was glad that I picked them to visit in my very precious time. I also met 2 of the people who worked there, and they were delightful. So I'll just show you the clip. Let's see. Yeah, I took vlogging clips, and there was one that was particularly related to the museum, so I thought I would play that. But maybe I can't play it when I have the other one queued up. So there we go. Okay. Excuse the face on the face. There we go. Look at that. So yes, it was gorgeous the 2 days I was in Scotland and in Southwest Scotland, and so that was pretty cool. But that was me after spending like an hour and a half, 2 hours at the North Ayrshire Heritage Museum. And well, I said it wasn't chock full of things that were useful for me on display because I think I have a very niche interest that maybe not many others would be interested in. They did have booklets that were more on the line of what I was looking for. So, for example, these are the sort of things I pick up: the Auchenharvey Colliery and Early History. So this is what like your local heritage society or museum will put together based on research of what's in their catalog and publish it cheaply enough. This was Stenlake Publishing, £4. Um, so not like an academic press, not like $50 for a paperback of 200 pages, like you might find elsewhere. So colliery, this means that they were looking for iron, bringing up substance from the earth and trying to make things with it. Auchenharvey is an area to the south of the three towns, so there's that. I've got, some tangential things. Auchenharvey Colliery disaster in 1895. So you'll see it was a little later than the period I'm looking for, but it was in activity like in that time period. So that was interesting, and I'll show you some pictures in a second about that. Then they put together a 3-town trail. So I started in Saltcoats, and they have a little town trail. It's really cool that they have like illustrated pieces with like when the town hall went up and who was contributing to it, and who died here and who's famous, and et cetera, et cetera. And then on a map, which is very helpful. So they have the Saltcoats, they have the Ardrossan, which is to the north of the harbor, same kind of thing. And you'll see very affordable, 25p price, and Stevenston. So Ardrossan is the north, Saltcoats is the middle, and Stevenston is the south. And I'll mention these again so you have them in your head when I tell you about where I was walking and where I took pictures. We've got a very early lady sea captain named Betsy Miller, who was from Saltcoats, and that was pretty cool. So her story was neat to read about. We've got Ardrossan Castle. So this is a little before my time period. You could see an ancient castle, not much known. They sort of reconstructed it virtually here. I walked up and looked at the ruins. There's not much there now. But again, before my period, medieval, so I have to kind of shut it off and be like Sherlock Holmes and say, I don't need to know it for the pursuit of this case, so don't remember anything. We've got the Bath Villa complex in Ardrossan, which is earlier than my period. So this was built in 1816. It was a bath complex like you would hear about in Bath, England, meaning people would go there to drink the waters or have healing dunks in special mineral water, etc. And it was supposed to do their health good. And they're still there, and they've been converted to residential flats. And I'm like, isn't that cool? Wouldn't you want to live in a place that could have been the site of a Jane Austen romance? Like, yes, please. So that was kind of neat. We've got a listing of other museums in the area, which of course I didn't have time to fit in, and I didn't have a car to drive to, so that would have been a little bit difficult. But then we've also got this very interesting thing called the Eglinton Tournament, and it's a bit swankier of a brochure. It's all clay pages and color illustrations. And here's where I'll explain a bit of the class differences that came into play that I'm using for modeling some of my character relationships on. So the Earl of Eglinton was, now let me get this right so I don't say it wrong. Ardrossan. He was in control of like Port Glasgow down to the north part of the harbor in the Three Tunes, which is Ardrossan. And so he's an interesting character. The Earls of Eglinton were from the clan Montgomery. So you've got a bit of a rivalry here. Their near neighbors were the Cunninghams, and they were to the south, and they controlled the other half of the harbor and eastward. And both very old Scottish families, noble families, if you want to call them that. And they had various economic projects and worked with each other or didn't. But one of the non-economic projects that the Earl of Eglinton got himself involved in 1839 was putting on a medieval tournament, because it was the era of romance, and like Sir Walter Scott and other romantics of the classical sense, they harkened back to the medieval time period. So here it is, my time period, and some rich dude is putting on this enormously expensive fake run fair. And they did it, and like everything went wrong, and he spent so much money, and like they had 1 out of 3 days that weren't rained on, and it's a pretty funny story actually. But the people in the area like him, and he's got lots of things on display. There's a trophy of like the tournament and stuff. Anyway, very curious, and who knows, that might make it into the story somehow. So that's some of the stuff that I learned. And now I'm going to bring up some pictures, because I do want a sort of slideshow, right? And we'll do photos. So I can't do the slideshow option because it's too long and it takes up the whole screen. So what we're going to do is just add it to the screen, and hope that's okay. I'm here. If I'm here, where should I go? Here? No. I did this beforehand. Okay, let's do this. So this is the North Ayrshire Heritage Centre. As I said, it's an old church, and it's been converted, so you can see there's a wall around it. There's also gravestones around there. And funnily enough, there's a gravestone to someone who is related to Edgar Allan Poe, kept in the museum from outside in the graveyard. Like, what? Pretty cool. But yeah, that's the outside. That's the back end. So you've got one monument from the graveyard area and what the other side of the building looks like today. And here we have a breakfast set from Eglinton Castle. So if you can't read the placard, which you probably can't, I'll read it. This little breakfast set is said to have come from Eglinton Castle. The story goes that when the castle was to be closed and abandoned, which happens with a lot of older properties because they can't afford to keep them open and pay the taxes, staff who worked there were allowed to choose something to take away with them, and this set was chosen by a maid, passed down to her daughter, then found its way into the hands of the donor, who has passed it on to us in September 2023. So this is the sort of family heirloom that when houses are broken up makes its way into garage sales, etc. And so the museum has a copy of like part of its history, and I really liked that. So I thought it was pretty. The gentry will definitely be coming into my story somehow. I have some of it set up, but I probably want to work more of it in there. One of the other things about this area is that they're well known for mining. A lot of it was later than my period because the scientific advances were later, but this is a small section of their library that was about mining in Stevenston. So I just took pictures of the books in case I can find them elsewhere. But the harbor was initially developed in order to ship coal or whatever was easily gotten out of the ground in the south part of the harbor. And when it was deemed economical to try to extract more coal, it became more difficult to get more efficiency out of the system, right? Because you got to go deeper, you got to hold the walls that are more risky open, you got to protect it from water intrusion, you got to get it to the harbor, and it's over all sorts of weird sands and clay and things. And so when I was reading about it, there was something about the reason the guy abandoned the quest to make this an efficient sort of harbor operation was that he would have had to build a canal and then stop and put it on the horse and then stop and put it on the ship, and it was just like because of the ground. There's not much you can do about it. So I thought that was neat. And then, in case anyone has ever wondered where people get their names inspiration, right? You can look at baby names books or historical like baptism records to get a sense of names, but like when you come across something like this, it's perfect. This is the wooden display where the winner of the top academic award each year was written. So if you were like the valedictorian of your class in whatever sixth form, I guess this would be, you got your name written up on the board. And that's a perfect bank of names to use. So I definitely took pictures. We've got the Ducks Award for boys as well as Ducks girls. And again, this is a little later. So it's starting in 1902, right? And if you think they're like 10 years old, 12 years old, it's about 1890 when they were born. So I'm looking at about 80, 90 years earlier. But I think some of these are sort of evergreen names. And if you get in a rut, this is where I'm going to come back and be like, oh, what about a Minnie? I never think of the name Minnie. That's good. I do think of the name Effie. I like that one. And Margaret. I mean, I'm going to use Margaret. It's an old name, so there's that. Let's see. Then we're going back to the south. So this is where I was when I took that video. I went to the south part, which is a big park now, which is where the coal works and colliery used to be. So it's a big, open pit, and there's water that seeps in there, kind of thing that's been covered over. This is the remains of the pump house. So the disaster was, in fact, 1895 pit disaster. People got trapped, and the water came in, and it sort of stopped works on everything. But the pump house was supposed to pump water out, and I believe it failed, but the ruins are still there. And it's quite picturesque. It's right next to the beach. It used to be a golf course, and you could see there's like little pigeons roosting. So this is my little outside break while I was researching the area. And then walking back to town, we've got some of the houses. So this used to be a mission hospital, so basically like a convalescent hospital, 1870s. I was sort of entranced by the inscriptions here because we've got 1888, which is one of the, I think, like the second remodel, but we've also got these strange dates and initials, TC and WB, and they don't line up with the benefactors, James Smith, and I don't remember the other one at the moment. But so I'm looking at that going, I know I read somewhere what that spells out, and it's somewhere in my research paperwork. But that's the sort of thing that intrigues me and like might get dropped into the book as, oh, if someone from that area read it, they would know what I was talking about. That would be a really cool Easter egg. And then that is the Bath Villa. So this is one of the converted to residential houses that used to be another sort of convalescing place where rich folks could go to the healing waters and get treated. Now remodeled from 1816. So yeah, I just thought that was really cool. Not jealous at all. Jocelyn's here. Hello. And Jim, hey y'all. And Barrett, hey friends at work, can't say, just saying hello. I appreciate it. Nice to see you guys here. You're nerding out with me. So this is when I wandered up a hill. So I was down by the sea, now I'm up a hill. And this is a character that's going to sort of meld. I have a few characters where I have a different profession, but this was a really interesting position for someone to be in society. This is a monument to Dr. Alexander McFadgen, and there is no J in there, but I will not put in the uh, spelling because it's a Z, and that just threw me for a loop. Anyway, he worked at the Bath Villas. He was instrumental in treating a lot of folks who couldn't afford to pay. He was a very respected citizen. So even if he wasn't up on the latest medical developments, like in Edinburgh or in the medical college, he was definitely a respected member and someone who did a lot of good for the community. So he's got this big monument on a hill here near the castle ruins, which is kind of neat with lions. And I think I'm going to repurpose one of my poorhouse benefactors to be a doctor and sort of take what threads I can from the little information I got about this guy, which is pretty interesting. I am amazed you managed to fit so much in. I know. Yes. So there's the doctor character. Also, when I walk around on these and sort of take pictures as documentation, I look at what the land looks like, right? And this reminds me a lot of US because I see what looks like a mucker on the left, which is these tufty, tussocky grass, and little burns finding their way through after the rains. And everything is green, of course. So that will just give me an indication of what the backdrop is. Like, that tells me there's trees, but they're bare at this time of year, and it's going to be muddy, and there's going to be boggy parts to step into, and that might turn into a plot point. But when you have that sort of backdrop in a visual, that can help you imagine what might happen easier. So I really like taking pictures and using those as reference points. Okay, now we're going to switch over here. This is a modern historical plaque, but it talks about my period. So, Pollockshaw's West. And if you're from Glasgow, that's not in the three tones. We're transitioning here. So after I spent, let's take this out a second. After I spent 2 nights in Ardrossan, I headed back up to Glasgow. First day I was meeting up with the booktubers, who you saw in my last video. The second day I walked around Southside, and that was glorious. I think I logged like 14 plus miles that day. So it was a lot. It was a lot of walking, but it was a gorgeous day. And met people and shopped and had some good baked goods. It was a well-rounded day. And you'll be able to see more of that in the actual vlog of the whole trip, which will come out in a few days on the 31st, hopefully. But that was the second day. And then the third day, because they weren't open before then, Tuesday, I had my appointment at the archives. So I'm going to show a little bit of the Monday where I was tootling about trying to get south side of Glasgow random facts, and then we'll go sort of talk about the archives experience. So this is a medallion that was on a railway stop for Pollockshaw's West. And I chose Pollockshaw's and Pollock Country Park and Shawfields, this sort of neighborhood, because I thought they would be a good representation of another like class distinction, right? It's going to be a little later. Again, it's in the 1880s and 1890s when these housing developments happened because later industrialization. But the country parks, like the rich people stuff, is still the same. So the oldest surviving station in Glasgow opened by the Glasgow, Barrhead, and Neilson Direct Railway in 1848, later becoming part of the Glasgow, Barrhead, and Kilmarnock Joint Railway. And now it's a community cycle resource since 2013. That's kind of neat. But this is the sort of thing, like if you see a plaque on a building, if you see a plaque anywhere, I'm going to take a picture of it. Yeah, so if you like to do that, you can travel with me. So here is Pollock Country Park. And, this is the sort of thing where I have to get into the heads of people who lived here and looked out on all that like, yes, please. So just illustrating the big gap between people who had the big house and the big grounds and the sculptured gardens and the walls and all that stuff, and the rivers and the meadows and the cattle, and people who are living in the flats and doing laboring jobs, and like, how are they going to interact or perceive each other? And then my shadows in that one. So the next pieces are, since I was researching what I'm researching about this period when slavery was abolished and sugar aristocracies were continuing in different ways, I kept seeing all the references to the Caribbean and sugar, and so I just took pictures of them because this is like the random stuff. This is in the South Side, the Rum Shack Caribbean Bar and Kitchen. All the sugar packets that I took, and things like street signs named after either people who were rich or their properties, their colonies, or whatever we want to call these. But St. Vincent Street in Glasgow, like, that's just one example. There's islands called St. Vincent and St. Kitts, and all these sort of things are reflected in a place that used to have a close relationship with the Caribbean. And so that's just interesting to see and notice and explore if that's going to be more central to your novel. For me, it is not. I'm not going to the Caribbean. So, yeah, we're sticking with the cold climates, unfortunately. But yeah, I like noticing those things and seeing if there's relations. All right, we finally made it Tuesday morning of the trip to the Mitchell Library. And I'm going to give you all 4 views of the Mitchell Library. This is from the south, where there's a big freeway going right through, sort of as a boundary to the city. This is, I think, from the west, because I went around clockwise. From the north, you get to see those like statues and the like columns and everything, very ornate. And that might be the east, so that's what's facing the freeway and the ugliest, in my opinion. Of course, subjective, but it looks more like a 1960s extension in the middle there for a parking lot. But what do I know? So, let me chat about the library for a second, and make sure I didn't leave anything out. I got the video clip. I got the booklets. Yes, we're in Glasgow. So I had 2 pieces to the Glasgow archives. I went in with my appointment for the archives, which is on the top floor of the Mitchell Library. The Mitchell Library is a huge sort of central library for their system. And while I was waiting, because they don't open until 10, and I'm an early bird, I was looking at all this stuff. It was really pretty inside, obviously made with slavery legacy money. I was browsing their Glasgow City section of the library, not the archives, and I came upon a bunch of books about banking history. I mean, I didn't come upon them. I asked where to find them, and then I looked at them. And this is part of the piece that will hopefully be invisible in the story, because it's like, if you know the facts and you say something wrong, it's going to sound really stupid. But if you want people not to like come up on those things and know that they're wrong in your book, you have to figure out how things worked. And I think banking was one of those things that right now, banking is very complex, derivatives markets, like algorithms, all that kind of stuff, mortgage-backed securities, blah, 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 blah. But back then, it was also complex because they were shifting from one type of system to another, and it was a big controversy, like 80s housing scandal big. And so I saw some of these books and was like, this may be a good in terms of how people got their money, who was trustworthy, and again, a good source of names of people for possible character names. So I found books, and what's interesting is, even with their library books, if I wanted to take pictures of different pages and save them for research, they made me write down which pages I was taking pictures of, and I have to get permission to share them or publish them in any way, which makes sense, publishing wise, because that's trademarked or copyrighted. But I don't imagine the US has that restriction. I don't know. I've never done anything like this formal of a request, I will say. So maybe I've just been like sharing things on Twitter. I'm not making any money on Twitter, so I guess they can't really ask for anything back. But anyway, so these were things about early Glasgow banks, and of course, it's going to be the rich people getting together to lend credit and work with businesses, and then that sort of works its way through society because everyone sort of needs things from different people, and at least that's how it should work. So I took a lot of pictures, and I'm like going to be going back through those. They're all in my photos library, but I can't share them with you here. Leslie is here. Happy Wednesday. Oh, you will also see at the top the strike of the Glasgow weavers, 1787. So that's before my time period. So basically, I was sort of, again, fishing expedition, looking for things to bring in, whether it was character or setting or other details. And I forgot to ask, please, if you've got questions, pop them in the chat. I'd love to chat about different things that you're finding interesting. All right, so banking history is what I got in the library. Then when I was allowed into the archives, yes, when I was allowed into the archives, here we go. I got a table that was set up for me with all the materials I had requested, minus a couple because they're not completely staffed, let's say. And so this is what it looked like. This is what my setup was. There's the agreement that I had to like write in all the pages that I took pictures of. And there's my notebooks where I was going to take all my notes. So that is, TBD because I don't want to release the story. But basically, I was looking for, again, representative samples of correspondence. What were fathers writing to daughters? What were managers writing to patrons? There was an election Bible. So like a political Bible is what it was called. And that was like the tally marks of all the people who could be counted on that their vote was bought at a certain time for an election. And that was around my time period, around 1830s, 40s. So that was pretty fascinating. And really old things. And one of the things that surprised me is that, let's see if I can get bigger here. One of the things that surprised me about this was that they don't want you to wear gloves with paper resources, like assets, whatever they call them. Because they found if you wear gloves, the gloves take the moisture further out of the paper and makes it drier and therefore more brittle. I think that's why. So with the paper objects, it's encouraged for people to go through them and look and, touch, obviously not crinkle, but your hands get really dry touching all that paper, I could tell you. And it helps, I think, just keep them usable instead of falling apart. So that was pretty cool. And as you can see in the next, like more boxes, more folders. They were all tied with little ribbons. It was pretty cute. I didn't realize that's how they would do it. There was also a pillow to like rest the book on, which made me think of Discovery of Witches, because that's how they do it in that book at the Bodleian Library, which of course I have not been to because I don't have the credentials for. So that was pretty neat. And then there is a box of the, handwritten letters. And what did letters look like back then? They did not look like they do now. So the handwriting is different, of course, but you've also got the envelopes being different and the paper being different. So you didn't have like loose leaf paper. What most of the letters I read was like a booklet. So you had a paper that was folded in half, and people would write 1, 2, 3, 4 on the different 4 pages. And that was interesting. I also saw a few incidences of cross writing, which I'm sure Anita knows is when, you write your handwriting across, then you rotate it 90 degrees, and then you write. So you've got lines like this and lines like this. And good luck to whoever has to read that, because you're saving on postage, or no, you're saving them on postage because people who received had to pay, but you're costing them their eyesight because it's ridiculous to have to read. And I was in such a timed space, I did not have time to like adjust to it. So some of these I got to note and take pictures of, but I did not have enough time to like tease apart the meaning and the history. And it was further complicated because some of the resources they didn't have, or they hadn't found the one that I had requested. And so, you get what you get. And it was just a fishing expedition anyway. So I was very delighted to go through what I did, and like hold those actual pieces of people's lives. It was just pretty special. Some of them were personal, and you get a sense of what people would say in a letter when you see the beginnings and you see the endings. So that's sort of what I focused on, because I do like writing letters here and there in my books, and so I don't want them to ring wrong. I want them to ring true. So yeah. And I think there's one more. That's the last picture. So this is me after the 2 hours and 20 minutes I was allotted. I was back in the library with the banking books to get as much as I could. And the only selfie I dared to take was like sideways with my head on the table. So that is like my last picture. Then I had to pack everything up with my suitcase and run back to the train station to make it back to London. So that is the exciting archive and research journey, and some of the stuff that I discovered. Ooh, what? Oh my gosh. Okay, so Catpaw, I've got a question. Catpaw says sometimes when people didn't have paper, they replied that way, writing at 90 degrees. That makes so much sense, and that's a great tidbit. Thank you. I don't think I had learned that before. That's really cool. Answer to your question. Oh, my question in the chat about where you would want to go to research. And Leslie's answer is Lithuania. Ooh. And what time period would you be researching? That is very interesting. And then her question for me is, how do you know when you've done sufficient research to move on to the next step of your process writing the story? And this is, of course, one of the age-old questions. So, of course, it's a little bit like plumbing the depths and going, okay, can I procrastinate anymore? No? Okay, I guess I'll sit down and write. As I said, I have gotten 2 editing sessions in with the help of the March Madness writing sprints. That's me going back over my draft from November and marking where I have things I need to change. I'm marking the characters that I introduced that are new at the beginning. It's too many at once. I just recognize that right away. And then sort of like the main scenes in each chapter, so that when I drop more of this layering on, I know where it goes. And also, if I have to mess with structure, I know where everything is instead of scrolling forever up and down. But to get back to your question, I do it sort of side by side. So primary research, like looking at letters and stuff, is really a special case for me. I don't do that regularly. This is the first time I've gone to an actual archive and touched 200, 300-year-old letters. It's very special. Normally, I'm reading secondary sources like library books, nonfiction, history books. And so they will report, and they'll have a bibliography where it says from this person's memoirs or biography, and you're like, well, I'm not going to go get another one, do another layer. Like, this is all I need for my story. So, so now that I've got big swaths, I'll say, and I have the kernel of a story, and I have an end. Do I have an end? Yes, but it's too abrupt, so we're going to edit that. I need to keep going, editing through those chapters, finish that, and then start making decisions that will make it more efficient, like character names and the dates and birth dates and where from, so that every time I go through, I'm not wondering, oh, I'll have to change that park name at some point and I don't know what it is. That's like multitasking. It's just switching back and forth, when if you make the decision first, then you could stay in the flow. So that's what I figure I will do next. And then just keep those things on the side and keep referring to them so that I know when to put them in, if that makes sense. And this is all the plan. This is all like what I project. I could be way off. Oh. Leslie's got another question. Is there one particular artifact that sticks out to you or sparked your imagination the most? Artifact. I haven't found that for my story yet. Like, there's definitely buildings. But I don't have an artifact for my story yet. That's a good question. If I find one in all the photographs before the vlog is due on Sunday, I will include it as a special shout out to Leslie. And her answer, Trakai Island Castle was built in 14th century Lithuania. I'd like a historical fiction narrative around that. It's really pretty. Wow. 14th century. I have no idea what 14th century Lithuania looks like. I barely have any idea what Irish would look like in the 14th century. That's so cool. That's so cool. Nice. Well, you know, whenever you have time, you can always dip your foot in. Okay. That was awesome. So hopefully that was enjoyable for all you book nerds that are with me out there. I had one other thing basically in the same line as local museums, which is when I was walking around London, which I had to stay in on the way in and on the way out because Portland doesn't fly direct to Glasgow. I saw Somerstown, which is like a neighborhood in the north of London, and they had their own sort of like socialist leaning community museum, just like in a house on the street, one story, way big banners, flags, little like sidewalk cafe kind of exhibit of things. And it was raining. That was when it was pissing down, and I was like, I can't stop for this. Like, I don't know. But that's the sort of thing that I would stop if it was closer to the story that I was writing. Like, that's gold. That's the gold that I'm looking for. Oh, there's a really funny, actually, Leslie, on your question about a particular artifact. This is a funny one. This isn't like a core inspirational one, but there's a stone that looks like it was carved with something like a shield and a gig, so like an ancient Celtic goddess image or whatever, but it's very worn. And they had this in the museum in North Ayrshire, and they had the little placard with it that said, "Unidentified stone. We found this. We don't know what it goes to. If you recognize the design, please let us know." So I'm wondering how long it's going to take someone to happen by and be like, oh, this is obviously from this tradition, and it means it's this era, and, you know, give or take 300 years and all that kind of stuff. So that's the sort of stuff that's really funny and, like, makes a trip, I don't know, enjoyable. And even if you're not finding exactly the right thing for your book, you're getting sort of stimulated and things are flowing in the brain. So I like it. That is it for me today. That was, yeah, as Kat Foss says, that was quite the haul of historical information. I've got novels I brought back. I've got local histories I brought back for the Bookshop haul. And I've got these booklets that are like teensy weensy, what's it called? Micro history, I would say, that will be really helpful as well. So I'm very excited to dive back in. It's very busy right now. We're working on taxes. I'm in California. I'll be driving another 2-day, 2,000-mile journey pretty soon. So it is a little squished, but I hope to be back on track and able to update you with perhaps another draft in a month or so in April for my birthday. Who knows? Who knows? So I appreciate you guys watching. I hope this was enjoyable and gets you a little historical fiction hit while you're waiting for your next great read. I will be here this Friday for final Friday productivity sprints, and maybe I will get some more chapters done then. So tune in with me if you want to join. And happy reading, everybody. Take care, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.